Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we're going to journey deep into the shadowed forests of Japan, where mist clings to ancient waterfalls and the boundary between beauty and terror dissolves like morning dew. We're going to explore one of Japanese folklore's most captivating and unsettling creatures, a being who has haunted the imagination of storytellers for centuries. Her name is Jorōgumo, the Spider Woman, and her tale is one woven with threads of desire, deception, and danger. Before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, pull your blanket a little closer, and let the weight of the day drift away from your shoulders. Take a deep breath in through your nose, hold it for a moment, and then release it slowly through your mouth. Again. One more time. Good. Tonight's journey will be long and detailed, taking us through ancient texts, remote waterfalls, and the very origins of one of Japan's most enduring legends. There's no rush, nowhere else to be. Just settle in. Close your eyes if you wish, and let my voice guide you into the world of the Jorōgumo. In the rich tradition of Japanese folklore, there exists a vast pantheon of supernatural beings known as yokai. These creatures inhabit a realm between the human world and the spirit world, neither fully of one nor the other. Some yokai are mischievous tricksters who delight in pranks. Others are benevolent guardians who protect travelers and villages. And then there are those like Jorōgumo, whose nature is far more complex, far more dangerous. She is a creature who reminds us that beauty can be a weapon, that desire can be a trap, and that the most enchanting melodies might lead us to our doom. The story of Jorōgumo isn't just one tale, but a collection of stories that have evolved across centuries and across the Japanese archipelago. From the thundering waterfalls of Izu to the quiet pools of Sendai, her legend has taken root in the imagination of farmers, fishermen, woodcutters, and travelers. Each region has added its own details, its own warnings, its own understanding of what the Spider Woman represents. But at the heart of every version lies the same terrifying truth. Beneath the guise of a beautiful woman lurks something ancient, patient, and hungry. As we explore her story tonight, we'll trace the origins of her name, examine her various forms, walk through the most famous tales told about her, and consider what she represents in the broader context of Japanese culture and mythology. We'll also look at the real creature that inspired her legend, meet her in the pages of ancient texts and in the illustrations of master artists, and compare her to similar spider women from cultures around the world. By the time our journey ends, you'll understand why Jorōgumo has endured for so long in the Japanese imagination, and why she continues to fascinate and terrify to this very day. So let us begin where all good stories begin, with a name that carries meaning, history, and power. A name that, when whispered in the right place at the right time, can still send a shiver down the spine of anyone who knows the tales. Let us begin with Jorōgumo herself. The name Jorōgumo is written with specific kanji characters that reveal much about how this creature has been understood throughout Japanese history. In modern usage, the name is typically written as Jorōgumo, which translates to binding bride or entangling bride. This is a poetic and somewhat euphemistic way of describing what she does, evoking the image of a bride who ensnares her victims in an embrace that, while seemingly tender, proves impossible to escape. The word binding refers to her spider silk, those impossibly strong threads that can wrap around a grown man and hold him as securely as iron chains. The word bride speaks to her seductive appearance, her role as a beautiful woman who might seem like the perfect match, the ideal companion until it's far too late. But this wasn't always how her name was written. The original characters used for Jorōgumo were far more direct, far more honest about her nature. They translated to horse spider, a blunt descriptor that made clear what kind of creature she was understood to be. This was a being who used sexuality and desire as weapons, who exploited the weaknesses of men, who thought with their passions rather than their sense. The change from horse spider to untangling bride represents a softening of the legend over time, a way of making the creature more palatable for polite conversation, while maintaining the essential warning at the heart of her tale. The legend tells us that Jorōgumo isn't born as a supernatural creature. She begins life as an ordinary spider, specifically a species known as the golden orb weaver. In Japan, this spider is called Jorōgumo in its natural form, and we'll return to discuss this real creature in detail later. But according to the folklore, when one of these spiders lives for 400 years, something remarkable and terrible happens. The accumulated years of existence, the countless seasons of spinning webs and catching prey, somehow imbue the spider with magical power. On that 400th birthday, the spider undergoes a transformation. It grows to enormous size, sometimes described as large as a cow. More importantly, it gains the ability to shapeshift, to take on human form. This 400-year threshold is significant in Japanese folklore. Many creatures, from foxes to raccoon dogs to other types of spiders, are said to gain supernatural powers after reaching great age. Time itself becomes a form of power, experience accumulating like water behind a dam until finally it breaks through into something beyond the natural order. The spider, who has survived 4 centuries, has proven itself cunning, patient, and adaptable. It has outwitted predators, weathered storms, endured harsh winters and scorching summers. It has mastered its environment completely. And now, with its newfound powers, it can hunt prey far more satisfying than flies and mosquitoes. Now it can hunt men. The geographical origins of the Jorōgumo legend are most strongly associated with the Izu Peninsula in Shizuoka Prefecture on the main island of Honshu. More specifically, the tales often center around a place called Jorin Falls, a stunning waterfall that cascades down in multiple tiers, surrounded by lush forest. Even today, Jorin Falls remains a place of natural beauty, attracting visitors who come to admire the water and perhaps sample the region's famous wasabi. But for centuries, it was also known as a place of danger, a place where the Jorōgumo was said to dwell. The waterfall setting is crucial to understanding the legend. Waterfalls in Japanese culture often serve as liminal spaces, places where the barrier between the human world and the spirit world grows thin. The constant roar of falling water drowns out other sounds, creating a kind of sonic isolation. The mist that rises from the churning pool at the waterfall's base obscures vision, making it easy for something to approach unseen. And the water itself, always moving, always changing, embodies transformation and danger. A person could slip on wet rocks, be swept away by the current, or simply disappear into the depths of the pool. Waterfalls are places of beauty and power, but also places where death can come swiftly and without warning. They're the perfect habitat for a creature like Jorōgumo. The earliest written references to Jorōgumo appear in Japanese texts from the late Heian period, which lasted from 794 to 1185. The Konjaku Monogatari, or Tales of Times Now Past, is a massive collection of over 1,000 tales compiled during this era. This anthology drew from Japanese, Chinese, and Indian sources, weaving together Buddhist teachings, moral lessons, and folklore into a comprehensive picture of the supernatural world as understood at the time. Within its pages, we find stories of spiders that transform into beautiful women to seduce and kill unsuspecting men. These early accounts established the basic framework of the legend that would be elaborated upon in later centuries. But it was during the Edo period from 1603 to 1868 that the Jorōgumo legend truly flourished and became codified in the form we recognize today. The Edo period was a time of relative peace and stability in Japan, which allowed for a flowering of arts and culture. Storytelling became a popular form of entertainment, and tales of yokai and supernatural encounters circulated widely, both orally and in printed form. Books like the Tai, Hei Hyaku Monogatari, and the Tano Higasa contained stories specifically about Jorōgumo, describing her methods, her habitat, and the fates of those who encountered her. These Edo period accounts often framed Jorōgumo tales as cautionary stories with clear moral lessons. They warned travelers about the dangers of remote places, cautioned men about the perils of lust and desire, and reminded everyone that beauty alone was never a guarantee of safety or good intentions. In a society that valued caution, propriety, and awareness of one's surroundings, the Jorōgumo served as a perfect embodiment of what could happen when one let down their guard or followed their passions without thinking of consequences. What's particularly fascinating about the evolution of the Jorōgumo legend is how it reflects changing attitudes toward women, sexuality, and danger across Japanese history. The four-spider designation suggests a deep anxiety about female sexuality that wasn't controlled or sanctioned by marriage and social propriety. The later binding bride terminology maintains the warning but wraps it in more acceptable language. Throughout all versions, however, Jorōgumo remains a figure of female power expressed through attraction and deception, a woman who isn't passive or subordinate, but actively predatory. In this sense, she represents both fear of and fascination with feminine agency and power. The legend also speaks to the relationship between humans and nature in Japanese thought. Japan is a nation where nature has always been both beautiful and dangerous, where earthquakes and typhoons remind people of their fragility, where the forest can be a place of spiritual renewal, or a place where one can easily become lost. Jorōgumo embodies this duality perfectly. She is as beautiful as the waterfall she inhabits, as alluring as a perfect spring day. But like nature itself, she is utterly indifferent to human life and suffering. She follows her own needs, her own hunger, without moral consideration. She is nature's reminder that beauty and danger often share the same face. As we move forward in our exploration of Jorōgumo, keep in mind that her name, her origins, and the places associated with her are all pointing us toward deeper truths about Japanese culture and the human experience. She is more than just a monster in a scary story. She is a mirror that reflects anxieties about desire, about trust, about the masks we all wear and the faces we show to the world. She is a question asked across centuries. How do we know what's real? How do we distinguish between genuine affection and manipulation? When we encounter beauty, how do we also perceive the danger that might lurk beneath? To understand Jorōgumo is to understand that she exists in multiple forms, each one carefully calibrated to serve her purposes. Unlike many yokai who possess a single, consistent appearance, Jorōgumo is fundamentally a shapeshifter, a creature of transformation whose very essence is tied to her ability to change what she appears to be. This makes her particularly dangerous because one can never be entirely sure what one is looking at. The beautiful woman by the waterfall might be exactly what she seems, or she might be something else entirely. something ancient and hungry wearing a human mask. In her human form, Jorōgumo appears as a woman of extraordinary beauty. The descriptions from various tales emphasize that she isn't just pretty or pleasant to look at. She is breathtaking, the kind of beauty that makes men forget themselves, forget their responsibilities, forget their own names. She typically appears as a young woman, somewhere in her late teens or early 20s, in the full flower of youth and vitality. Her skin is described as flawless, her features delicate and symmetrical, her movements graceful and fluid. Everything about her physical presentation is designed to attract an entrance. Her hair is long and black, as was considered beautiful in traditional Japanese aesthetics, and it flows down her back like a dark waterfall of silk. Often, she is described as wearing her hair loose or partially bound in a style that suggests both innocence and subtle sensuality. Her clothing varies depending on the specific tale and the time period it was told in, but she generally appears dressed as a woman of some refinement. Not nobility necessarily, but not a common peasant either. She might wear a fine kimono, suggesting wealth and status, or she might be dressed more simply, but with an elegance that speaks to good breeding and education. What makes her appearance even more compelling is that she doesn't just look beautiful, she knows how to act. She understands human social cues and emotional vulnerabilities. When she approaches a potential victim, she does so with appropriate shyness or boldness depending on what the situation calls for. She might appear demure and in need of help, triggering protective instincts. Or she might be more forward, flattering her target's ego, making him feel desired and special. She adapts her performance to match what will be most effective with each particular man. In some versions of the tales, Jorōgumo appears not alone but carrying a baby. This detail adds another layer to her disguise, as a young mother with an infant seems vulnerable and trustworthy, someone who clearly needs assistance and protection. Of course, as those tales reveal, the baby is actually a spider's egg sac, a mass of future offspring that the Jorōgumo is nurturing. But a man seeing a beautiful woman with a child in her arms wouldn't know this, wouldn't suspect anything amiss until it was far too late. One particularly unsettling aspect of Jorōgumo's human form is that it's not always perfect. While she can appear flawlessly human to the naked eye, her reflection sometimes betrays her true nature. In several tales, characters see Jorōgumo's spider form when they look at her reflection in water or in a mirror. The reflection shows the truth that the eyes alone cannot perceive, revealing the massive spider body where the beautiful woman appears to stand. This detail adds a layer of supernatural horror to the legend, suggesting that reality itself bends around Jorōgumo, that she projects an illusion so powerful it can fool even our most reliable senses. Only by looking indirectly, through reflection, can the truth be perceived. When Jorōgumo reveals her true form, or when she is seen in her spider aspect, she is described as massive and terrifying. In some accounts, she grows to the size of a cow, a huge, hulking arachnid with legs that span several feet, and a body bloated with power and hunger. Her coloring varies in different tellings, but she retains characteristics of the real Joro spider that inspired her legend, with bright yellows and blacks, sometimes marked with brilliant blue or green bands that make her simultaneously beautiful and alien. Her spider form has all the expected features of an arachnid enlarged to monstrous proportions. 8 long, jointed legs, each ending in tiny claws that can find purchase on any surface. Multiple eyes that can track movement in nearly every direction. Chelicerae, the jaw-like structures near her mouth, capable of injecting venom, and most importantly, spinnerets at the rear of her abdomen that produce silk, that remarkable material that is both delicate and incredibly strong, that can be woven into webs or shot out as binding threads to ensnare prey. But perhaps the most disturbing form Jorōgumo can take is the hybrid, the half-woman, half-spider manifestation that appears in many artistic depictions and in some of the tales. In this form, her upper body remains that of a beautiful woman, complete with human torso, arms, and face. But from the waist down, her body transforms into that of a spider, with multiple legs extending from where her hips would be and a large spider abdomen forming the bulk of her lower body. This hybrid form is particularly unsettling because it doesn't allow for the comfortable separation of human disguise and monster revealed. Instead, it presents both aspects simultaneously, forcing the viewer to confront the fact that the woman and the spider are not separate beings, but two expressions of the same creature. The famous 18th century artist Toriyama Seiken, whose illustrated yokai encyclopedias we'll discuss in more detail later, depicted Jorōgumo in precisely this half-woman, half-spider form. In his illustration, she is surrounded by smaller spiders, her children or servants, all of them attending to her. She holds a biwa, the traditional Japanese lute, emphasizing her role as a musician who charms her victims with melody. The image is elegant and artistic, but also deeply creepy, capturing the essential duality of Jorōgumo's nature. The symbolic significance of Jorōgumo's multiple forms cannot be overstated. In Japanese culture and in many cultures around the world, the ability to shapeshift represents power, wisdom, and danger. Foxes, tanuki, cats, and other creatures are said to possess shape-shifting abilities in Japanese folklore, and they all share certain characteristics. They're clever, they're tricksters. They live on the boundaries between wilderness and civilization, and they remind humans that appearances can be deceiving. Jorōgumo fits perfectly into this tradition, but with an added element of predatory intent. While a fox might transform to play tricks or a tanuki to avoid danger, Jorōgumo transforms specifically to hunt and kill. Her beauty itself is a form of camouflage, perhaps the most effective kind. In nature, many predators use camouflage to blend into their surroundings and ambush prey. Jorōgumo's human beauty serves the same function. By appearing as something desirable rather than dangerous, she gets close to her victims, close enough to strike. She weaponizes the very instincts that normally help humans form bonds and relationships, turning attraction and desire into tools of predation. This makes her particularly insidious because she doesn't just threaten physical safety. She threatens the ability to trust one's own instincts and perceptions. The fact that Jorōgumo can switch between forms at will also means that she exists in a state of perpetual liminality. She is neither fully spider nor fully woman, but something in between. Something that can be both, or either depending on circumstance and need. This liminal state makes her inherently unsettling, because humans are creatures who like clear categories and boundaries. We want to know what something is so we can respond appropriately. A spider we can crush or avoid. A woman we can interact with according to social conventions. But something that is both and neither. That confuses our categories and leaves us uncertain how to proceed. And in that moment of uncertainty, Jorōgumo strikes. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating and frightening creature, remember that her appearance, in all its forms, is always purposeful. Every aspect of how she presents herself serves her ultimate goal, which is to feed, to survive, to continue her existence across centuries. She is beautiful because beauty is useful. She is terrifying because terror is honest. And she shifts between these states as easily as breathing, always perfectly adapted to the moment and the victim at hand. Jorōgumo possesses a fearsome array of supernatural powers that make her one of the most dangerous yokai in Japanese folklore. While her shape-shifting ability is perhaps her most well-known power, it is far from her only weapon. She is a creature who has had 400 years to perfect her craft, to refine her hunting techniques, to learn every trick and method that might help her catch and consume human prey. Let us explore the full range of her capabilities, from the mundane to the magical, from the physical to the psychological. The foundation of all her other powers is her shape-shifting ability, which we've already touched upon, but which deserves deeper examination. Jorōgumo can transform not just her body, but her entire presence. She doesn't merely change shape, she becomes human in every detectable way. Her skin has the warmth and texture of human flesh. Her breath is that of a living person. She can speak, laugh, cry, and display emotions convincingly enough to fool even those who might be suspicious. This isn't a simple illusion that might be penetrated by touching her or by close observation. This is a complete transformation, a wholesale reconstitution of her form. The only reliable ways to see through her disguise are those indirect methods mentioned earlier. Her reflection reveals the truth. In some tales, animals, particularly dogs and horses, can sense her true nature and react with fear or aggression. And occasionally, a Buddhist monk or Shinto priest with spiritual insight might perceive something wrong, some aura or energy that doesn't match what his eyes are showing him. But for an ordinary person, encountering her in human form, there is no way to tell. She is, to all appearances, exactly what she claims to be. Her web-spinning abilities are no less impressive than those of any natural spider, but magnified to match her increased size and power. The silk she produces is described in the tales as being extraordinarily strong, far beyond what normal spider silk would be capable of. A single strand can bind a grown man's foot so securely that he cannot break free. Multiple strands wound together can pull objects as heavy as tree stumps into the water, dragging them down to the bottom of deep pools. The silk is also described as being sticky or adhesive in some accounts, ensuring that once something touches it, extraction becomes nearly impossible. But Jorōgumo doesn't just produce web material. She can shoot it out at distance, firing strands of silk like projectiles to ensnare victims who might be trying to flee or who are too far away to approach directly. She can create elaborate web structures, building traps that span wide areas, and that might look innocuous until someone stumbles into them. And she can use her silk in more subtle ways, perhaps leaving a strand attached to a victim that allows her to track him or to pull him back to her when the time is right. In her spider form, Jorōgumo possesses venom, and this venom is no ordinary toxin. Rather than killing quickly, like the bite of some deadly spiders, Jorōgumo's venom is described as working slowly, weakening her victim gradually over days or even weeks. A man bitten by Jorōgumo might not even realize what has happened to him. He'll simply find himself growing tired, losing weight, becoming wan and sickly. His strength ebbs away, his vitality fades, until finally he is too weak to resist or escape. This slow, acting venom serves Jorōgumo's purposes perfectly. It allows her to maintain a relationship with her victim, visiting him repeatedly, perhaps even tending to him in her human guise, while the poison she's introduced continues its work. By the time he realizes something is truly wrong, he is too enfeebled to do anything about it. One of Jorōgumo's most distinctive abilities is her power over other spiders. She is not a solitary hunter, but rather commands legions of lesser spiders that serve as her eyes, her scouts, her servants, and sometimes her weapons. In some tales, she can send out spider servants to search for potential victims, to report on human activity near her territory, or to keep watch over someone she has marked as prey. These spider servants might be ordinary-sized, or they might be larger than normal, but they all respond to her will and carry out her commands with perfect obedience. Even more frighteningly, some accounts speak of Jorōgumo having command over fire-breathing spiders. These creatures serve as her enforcers and defenders. If someone tries to investigate Jorōgumo's lair, if someone begins to suspect her true nature and asks too many questions, she can send her fire-breathing spider servants to destroy the person's home or to eliminate witnesses. The image of spiders that can produce flame is particularly nightmarish, combining two primal fears into a single threat. Whether these fire-breathing spiders are natural creatures with supernatural abilities or spirits in spider form is never quite clear in the tales. But their function is always the same: to protect Jorōgumo and to remove obstacles that might threaten her continued existence. Music plays a crucial role in many Jorōgumo tales, and her skill with the biwa, the traditional Japanese lute, is often described as being supernaturally perfect. When she plays, the music is described as being hauntingly beautiful, the kind of melody that captures the attention completely and makes everything else fade away. The sound of her biwa might drift through the forest, drawing curious listeners closer to investigate its source. Or she might play for a victim she's already lured to her lair, keeping him entranced and docile while she prepares to strike. The music serves multiple purposes in her hunting strategy. On the practical level, it can mask other sounds: the rustling of spider legs, the whisper of silk being spun, the approach of smaller spider servants. On the psychological level, music creates a sense of safety and culture. A woman playing a musical instrument is engaging in a civilized, artistic activity. She is clearly not a threat. She is refined, educated, peaceful. The cognitive dissonance between this cultured presentation and the truth of what she is helps to keep victims off guard until the moment she drops her mask. Jorōgumo also possesses an almost preternatural understanding of human psychology and behavior. She knows how to read people, how to identify their weaknesses and desires, how to present herself in the way most likely to disarm them. This isn't necessarily a magical ability in the sense of mind reading, but rather something she's learned through centuries of observation and practice. She has seen countless humans, studied their patterns, learned what makes them trust, what makes them desire, what makes them let down their guard. This accumulated knowledge makes her an expert manipulator, capable of tailoring her approach to each individual victim. In addition to her offensive abilities, Jorōgumo is difficult to kill or drive away. She is immune to poisons, which makes sense given that she herself is a venomous creature. Ordinary weapons can harm her in her spider form, but she is large, tough, and can retreat into water or other places where humans cannot easily follow. Her webs can serve as early warning systems, alerting her to approaching danger. And her ability to shapeshift means that even if someone discovers her lair, she might simply assume human form and walk away, blending into a village or town where no one would think to look for a monster. However, Jorōgumo is not invulnerable. The tales tell us that there are ways to combat her, though they require knowledge, courage, and sometimes supernatural aid. Buddhist sutras, chanted by a monk or priest, can disrupt her powers and reveal her true nature. The sound of these holy words seems to interfere with her shape-shifting, forcing her to return to spider form or at least weakening her disguise. This makes sense within the context of Japanese folk religion, where Buddhist teachings and practices are seen as having power over evil spirits and malevolent yokai. Certain substances are said to be effective against Jorōgumo. Diatomaceous earth, a powder made from fossilized algae, is mentioned in some accounts as being deadly to her. When thrown on her, it dehydrates her body, disrupting her form and potentially killing her. Fire is another traditional weakness. Like many spiders, Jorōgumo fears flame, and fire can destroy her webs and drive her from her lair. But perhaps her greatest weakness is also her greatest strength, her need to hunt. She cannot survive without feeding, and every time she approaches a potential victim, she exposes herself to risk. Every encounter is a chance that this time, someone will see through her disguise, or that a wandering priest will happen by, or that the victim will prove more dangerous than anticipated. One final ability worth mentioning is Jorōgumo's remarkable patience. 400 years of life has taught her that some hunts take time, that sometimes the best approach is to wait, to watch, to let opportunities develop rather than forcing them. She can maintain her human guise for extended periods, living among humans if necessary, building relationships and trust over weeks or months before finally revealing her true nature. This patience makes her all the more dangerous because there's no urgency to her predation, no desperation that might lead to mistakes. She has time. She always has time. And time, in the end, is perhaps her most potent weapon of all. The legend of Jorōgumo has been told and retold across Japan for centuries, and while the basic elements remain consistent, different regions and different storytellers have added their own details and emphasis. Let us now explore some of the most famous and detailed tales of Jorōgumo, starting with those associated with her primary haunt, the Waterfalls of Japan. These stories paint a vivid picture of her methods, her victims, and the consequences of encountering her. The most well-known tale comes from Jorin Falls in Izu, and it exists in several variations that all share common elements. In one version, the story begins with a man, often described as a logger or woodcutter, who is working in the forest near the falls. It is a hot day, the kind where the sun beats down mercilessly and sweat soaks through clothing almost immediately. The man decides to take a break from his labor and rest beside the waterfall, where the cool mist and the sound of falling water offer relief from the heat. He finds a comfortable spot on the rocks near the pool at the base of the falls, perhaps dangling his tired feet in the cool water. He unpacks his simple lunch, maybe some rice balls and pickled vegetables, and begins to eat. The setting is peaceful, almost idyllic. The forest around him is alive with the sounds of birds and insects. The water sparkles in the sunlight. It would be easy to drift off to sleep here, lulled by the constant white noise of the waterfall. But then something happens. The man feels something attached to his foot, something that shouldn't be there. He looks down and sees a strand of silk, thick and strong, wrapped around his ankle. It's sticky, adhering to his skin, and when he tries to pull it off, he finds it remarkably difficult to remove. As he struggles with this first strand, more appear, shooting out from somewhere in the churning water at the base of the falls. They wrap around his legs, his arms, pulling at him, trying to drag him toward the water. In this version of the tale, the man acts quickly. His woodsman's instincts and his strength serve him well. He manages to transfer the web strands from his own body to a nearby tree stump, perhaps one he'd cut earlier that day. He wraps the silk around the stump again and again, using it as a sort of decoy. And then, to his absolute horror, the stump is ripped from its place in the ground and pulled into the water with tremendous force. It disappears beneath the churning surface of the pool, dragged down into unknown depths. The man, shaken and terrified, flees back to his village. He tells everyone what happened, warning them about the danger lurking in the waterfall pool. The creature that tried to pull him in is given a name, Jorōgumo, the binding bride. And from that point forward, people avoid the waterfall, understanding that something unnatural dwells there, something patient and powerful and hungry. But the story doesn't end there. In some versions, time passes and a new woodcutter comes to the region, someone who hasn't heard the warnings or who doesn't believe the tales. This man is working near the waterfall when he accidentally drops his favorite axe into the water. It's a good axe, well balanced and sharp, and he's reluctant to lose it. As he stands at the water's edge, wondering if there's any way to retrieve his tool, a beautiful woman emerges from the water. She is breathtaking, with long dark hair plastered to her body, water droplets glistening on her skin. She smiles at the woodcutter and holds out his axe, which she's somehow retrieved from the depths of the pool. The woodcutter is amazed and grateful. He reaches for the axe, and she hands it to him, but as he takes it, she speaks. Her voice is soft, melodious, enchanting. She tells him that he must never speak to anyone about what happened here, about seeing her, or about how she returned his axe. If he keeps this secret, all will be well. The woodcutter agrees readily enough. How could he not? She's done him a kindness, and the request seems reasonable. He takes his axe and returns to his work, but he can't stop thinking about the beautiful woman in the waterfall. Over the next few days, he finds excuses to return to that spot, hoping to see her again. Sometimes she appears, sometimes she doesn't, but when she does, they talk. She is clever and charming, easy to speak with, and the woodcutter finds himself falling in love. But he's made a mistake, one that will cost him dearly. One evening, after too much to drink, the woodcutter starts boasting to his friends. He tells them about the beautiful woman who lives in the waterfall, about how she returned his axe, about how they've been meeting. His friends are skeptical, of course. A woman living in a waterfall. It sounds like a drunken fantasy. But the woodcutter insists, going into detail about her appearance, her voice, their conversations. That night, the woodcutter goes to sleep as usual in his simple home. But he never wakes up. When his friends check on him the next morning, they find his bed empty, though it shows signs of having been slept in. The woodcutter has simply vanished, leaving no trace. And those who know the old stories understand what happened. He broke his promise to the Jorōgumo. He spoke of her to others, and she came for him in the night, dragging him to her lair beneath the waterfall, where he became her next meal. Another version of the tale adds even more tragic layers. In this telling, the woodcutter doesn't just meet the woman casually. He falls deeply, genuinely in love with her. He visits the waterfall every single day, and each time he sees her, his devotion grows stronger. But those around him begin to notice changes in his appearance. He's losing weight. His skin grows pale and wan. His eyes develop dark circles beneath them. His family and friends grow concerned, but when they ask what's wrong, he insists everything is fine. He's just tired from work. A Buddhist monk from a nearby temple hears about the woodcutter's condition and grows suspicious. He knows the old tales about the waterfall, knows what might dwell there. He visits the woodcutter and tells him plainly that he suspects the man has been taken in by the Jorōgumo, mistress of the waterfall. He offers to help, to go with the woodcutter to the falls and chant sutras that will reveal the woman's true nature and break her hold. The woodcutter, though weakened, agrees. He and the monk journey to the waterfall together, and when they arrive, the woman appears as she always does, beautiful and welcoming. But when the monk begins chanting his sutra, reading the sacred Buddhist text aloud, something changes. Strands of spider silk shoot out from the water, reaching for the woodcutter, trying to pull him in. The monk shouts his chant louder, with more force, and the strands retreat, disappearing back into the water. Now the woodcutter knows the truth. The woman he loves is actually a spider yokai, a creature that has been slowly draining his life force, weakening him day by day with her venom. Any rational person would flee, would thank the monk for saving his life, and never return to this place. But the woodcutter is beyond rational thought. He cannot let go of his love, or perhaps he is too far under her spell to break free. He tells the monk that he understands what she is, but he doesn't care. He loves her anyway. Desperate to find a way to be with her, the woodcutter seeks out the Tengu, powerful supernatural beings that dwell in mountains and forests, and that are said to have authority over other yokai. He finds a Tengu and begs for permission to marry the Jorōgumo, to live with her as her husband. But the Tengu denies his request, likely understanding that this union would result in the woodcutter's death. A human cannot live peacefully with a Jorōgumo. She is a predator and he is prey. There can be no happy ending to such a relationship. Unable to accept this denial, unable to give up the woman he loves even knowing what she truly is, the woodcutter runs back to the waterfall. He rushes toward the pool, calling out for her. And this time, the Jorōgumo doesn't hide her nature. Spider silk erupts from the water in abundance, wrapping around the woodcutter, binding him completely. He is pulled into the water and disappears beneath the surface. He is never seen again. The waterfall has claimed another victim, and the legend of the Jorōgumo grows more firmly established. There is a particularly interesting variation of the waterfall tale that comes from Kashikabuchi in Sendai. In this version, when the man transfers the spider silk from his leg to a tree stump, and the stump is pulled into the water, a voice is heard emanating from the pool. It says, "Kashikoi, Kashikoi," which translates to clever, clever, or how clever. The Jorōgumo is acknowledging that the man has outwitted her, has used cunning to escape what seemed like an inescapable trap. The place gains its name from this incident, becoming known as Kashikabuchi, which means clever abyss or clever deep pool. What makes this version particularly fascinating is what happens afterward. Despite the danger, despite the clear evidence that something terrible lurks in the water, the people of the region don't shun the pool. Instead, they begin to worship the Jorōgumo as a protective deity. They see her not as a purely malevolent force, but as a powerful spirit of the water who can protect people from drowning. If properly respected and venerated, she might guard the pool rather than attack those who use it. To this day, there is supposedly a monument and a small torii, a sacred Shinto gate, standing at Kashikabuchi, marking it as a place of spiritual significance where the Jorōgumo is honored. This transformation from feared monster to protective deity might seem strange, but it reflects a common pattern in Japanese folk religion. Many yokai and spirits exist in a liminal space between malevolence and benevolence. Their nature isn't fixed, but depends on circumstances, on how they're treated, on whether or not proper respect is shown. A being might be dangerous to those who disrespect it, or who intrude carelessly into its territory, but helpful to those who acknowledge its power and make appropriate offerings. The Kashikobuchi Jorōgumo represents this principle perfectly. She is still dangerous, still capable of dragging someone to their doom. But she can also be a guardian, a protector, if approached with the right attitude. There's another famous Jorōgumo tale that takes place away from waterfalls entirely, showing that her hunting ground can extend beyond water sources. This story comes from Edo period texts and involves a man named Magoroku. One warm afternoon, Magoroku is dozing on the veranda of his home, enjoying a moment of relaxation. As he drifts between waking and sleeping, a woman appears before him. She looks to be in her 50s, well dressed and dignified in bearing. She speaks to Magoroku politely, telling him that her daughter has taken a fancy to him and would like him to visit their estate. Magoroku, confused and still half asleep, follows the woman. They walk together, and eventually they arrive at a magnificent house, far grander than anything in the immediate area. Inside, a beautiful young woman, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, greets him. She is stunning, and she immediately begins speaking of marriage. She wants Magoroku to become her husband. Magoroku explains that he's already married, that he cannot accept her offer no matter how honored he might be. But the young woman persists. She tells him a strange story. She claims that 2 days ago, Magoroku almost killed her mother. Despite this near tragedy, the mother still brought him here, still arranged this meeting. Surely, given this graciousness, given that her feelings for him are strong enough to overcome even attempted murder, he cannot simply walk away. He must accept her proposal. This bizarre reasoning finally snaps Magoroku out of whatever trance he's been in. He realizes that something is terribly wrong, that this situation makes no sense. In a panic, he runs from the house, fleeing back the way he came. But as he runs, the grand estate disappears around him like morning mist. The buildings fade away, the path beneath his feet changes, and suddenly he finds himself back on his own veranda, exactly where he'd been when he dozed off. His wife finds him there, confused and disoriented. She assures him that he's been asleep on the veranda the entire time, that he never went anywhere. It was all a dream, a strange and vivid dream, but nothing more. Relieved but still unsettled, Magoroku looks around his property. And then he sees it a small Joro spider that has built an elaborate, tight web around the eaves of the house. He remembers something that happened 2 days earlier. He'd seen a spider there and had tried to drive it away, perhaps even nearly killing it in the process. The realization hits him like cold water. The dream wasn't just a dream. The woman and her daughter were the spider, the Jorōgumo who dwelt on his property, taking on human form to try to ensnare him. His rejection of the marriage proposal, his flight from the false estate, had saved him from whatever fate the spider had planned. Magoroku quickly destroys the web and ensures the spider is gone, grateful that he somehow managed to resist the yokai's trap, even while half asleep and vulnerable. This tale is interesting because it shows Jorōgumo operating in a more domestic setting, building her web on someone's home rather than lurking in a remote waterfall. It suggests that she can be anywhere, that any spider, if it lives long enough, might transform into something dangerous and deceptive. The tale also plays with the boundaries between dream and reality, suggesting that Jorōgumo's powers might extend into the realm of dreams and visions allowing her to trap victims not just physically but psychologically. All of these tales, in their various versions, share common themes and warnings. They tell us that beauty can be deadly, that desire can blind us to danger, that promises made to supernatural beings must be kept at all costs, and that certain places, certain thresholds between the civilized world and the wild, are inherently dangerous and should be approached with caution and respect. The Jorōgumo stories function as survival guides dressed as entertainment, teaching listeners how to recognize danger and what to do when faced with the uncanny and impossible. Understanding how Jorōgumo hunts is crucial to appreciating why she has remained such a powerful figure in Japanese folklore. She is not a random killer or a simple monster that attacks anything that crosses her path. Instead, she is a methodical, intelligent predator who employs sophisticated strategies to catch her prey. Her hunting techniques combine physical prowess, supernatural abilities, and profound psychological manipulation, making her one of the most formidable yokai in all of Japanese mythology. The hunt begins with selection. Jorōgumo doesn't attack everyone who comes near her territory. She is selective, patient, and strategic in choosing her victims. Her preferred prey, according to the tales, are young men, particularly those who are handsome, virile, and in the prime of their lives. This preference isn't just about the quality of the meal. It's about vulnerability. Young men, especially those traveling alone or working in remote areas, often possess a dangerous combination of confidence and naivety. They believe themselves capable of handling danger, and they are susceptible to flattery and to the appeal of an attractive woman showing interest in them. Once Jorōgumo has identified a potential victim, she begins her approach. If she's dwelling at a waterfall, she might wait for someone to rest nearby, as in the tales we've already explored. If she's in a more urban or domestic setting, she might appear as a woman in need of assistance, creating a scenario where the social pressure to help someone in distress overrides any suspicion the victim might have. In all cases, her initial approach is carefully calibrated to seem non-threatening, even beneficial to the target. The use of her human form is critical in these early stages. As a beautiful woman, she has automatic access that a giant spider would never possess. Social conventions in traditional Japanese culture, particularly the expectation that men should be courteous and helpful toward women, work in her favor. A woman alone, especially one who seems lost or in some kind of trouble, triggers protective instincts. Add to this the fact that she is exceptionally beautiful, and the target's guard drops even further. The victim doesn't see a threat. He sees an opportunity, a potential romance, or at minimum a pleasant encounter that breaks up the monotony of his day. Jorōgumo understands conversation and uses it as a tool. She knows how to engage her victim in dialogue, how to draw him in with interesting talk, flattery, and apparent interest in what he has to say. She might ask him questions about his work, his life, his dreams. She might share seemingly personal details about herself, creating a false sense of intimacy and connection. All of this serves to make the victim comfortable, to make him let down his guard, to make him want to spend more time with her. In many accounts, music plays a crucial role once the victim has been lured to her lair or kept engaged for an extended period. The biwa, that traditional Japanese lute, becomes her instrument of enchantment. She plays with extraordinary skill, producing melodies that are described as being supernaturally beautiful. The music serves multiple purposes. It soothes the victim, lulling him into a relaxed, dreamy state where his awareness of danger diminishes. It masks other sounds, the subtle movements of silk being drawn out, the approach of lesser spider servants, the preparations for the final strike, and it creates an atmosphere of culture and refinement that is incompatible in the victim's mind with any kind of threat. While the victim is distracted by her beauty, her conversation, and her music, Jorōgumo begins the actual trapping process. This is where her spider nature asserts itself, though often in ways subtle enough that the victim doesn't immediately realize what's happening. She might shoot out a strand of silk to attach to his foot or leg, a thread so fine initially that he doesn't feel it. Or she might slowly spin web around the area where he's sitting or standing, creating an invisible net that will tighten when the time is right. In some versions of the tales, the webbing is more aggressive and obvious. Thick strands shoot out like ropes, wrapping around limbs, binding the victim in place before he can react. But in many accounts, the process is gradual, subtle, almost gentle. The victim might feel something restraining him, but by the time he looks down to investigate, he's already thoroughly ensnared. The silk that seemed barely there moments ago is now wrapped around him many times, binding him with a strength that no normal man can break. Once the victim is trapped, Jorōgumo's demeanor may change, or she may maintain her beautiful human form even as she begins to feed. Different tales describe this stage differently. In some, she reveals her spider nature, perhaps allowing her victim to see the monster he's been seduced by in his final moments. This revelation adds a layer of psychological torment to the physical doom he faces. He realizes that everything he believed about this encounter was false, that the beautiful woman never existed except as a disguise, that he's been played for a fool. In other versions, she maintains her human appearance, even as she begins to drain his life force. She might continue to speak to him softly, even tenderly, as she feeds. This is perhaps even more disturbing than the outright revelation of monstrosity. The victim dies or is weakened while looking at beauty, while hearing kind words, trapped in a fundamental disconnect between what he perceives and what is actually happening to him. The actual feeding process varies in the tales. Some describe her biting her victim and injecting venom that slowly weakens him, allowing her to savor his suffering over days or weeks. She might even visit him in human form during this period, perhaps posing as a concerned friend or even a healer, all while the poison she introduced continues its work. Eventually, when he is sufficiently weakened, she returns in her true form to consume what remains. Other accounts suggest a more direct form of feeding, where she wraps the victim in silk, creating a cocoon similar to how many spiders package their prey, and then slowly dissolves his tissues with digestive enzymes, consuming the liquefied remains. This is a horrifying end, being slowly digested alive within a silk prison, and it reflects the real hunting techniques of actual spiders. What makes Jorōgumo particularly dangerous is that she doesn't necessarily kill every victim immediately. Some tales suggest that she might keep certain victims alive, using them for various purposes. A man thoroughly trapped in her web and under the influence of her venom might be kept as a sort of larder, fed just enough to stay alive while she feeds on him intermittently. Or she might use human victims as hosts for her eggs, a detail that adds a horrifying reproductive element to her predation. The psychological dimension of her hunting technique cannot be overstated. Jorōgumo attacks not just the body but the mind. She manipulates desire, trust, and social conditioning. She makes her victims complicit in their own doom by making them want to be with her, by making them ignore warning signs, because the alternative, accepting that this beautiful woman might be dangerous, seems absurd or cowardly. In this way, she weaponizes the very qualities that make us human: our capacity for attraction, our desire for connection, our ability to hope for something good in an otherwise difficult world. Escape from Jorōgumo once she has revealed her intentions is extremely difficult, but not impossible. The tales tell us that quick thinking and decisive action can save a victim, as demonstrated by the woodcutter who transferred the silk to the tree stump. Supernatural aid, particularly from Buddhist monks or Shinto priests, can break her hold. And in some versions, if the victim genuinely loves someone else, if his heart truly belongs to another person, Jorōgumo's enchantment cannot fully take hold. True love in these tales serves as a kind of armor against her predation, a connection to something real and good that her illusions cannot quite overcome. But these escape methods all require awareness, quick action, and often elements beyond the victim's control. For most of the men who encounter Jorōgumo and fall into her trap, there is no escape. They simply disappear, vanishing into her lair, becoming one more meal for a creature that has been feeding for centuries, and that will continue to feed for centuries more, unless someone with sufficient knowledge, courage, and spiritual power can finally destroy her. The legend of Jorōgumo, like many Japanese folk tales, is not a single, unified story, but rather a tradition that has evolved differently across the various regions of Japan. Each area that tells Jorōgumo tales has added its own flavors, its own emphasis, and sometimes its own unique interpretations of what this spider woman represents and how she should be understood. These regional variations reveal much about how different communities viewed danger, femininity, and the relationship between humans and the natural world. As we've already discussed, the most famous Jorōgumo tales come from the Izu Peninsula in Shizuoka Prefecture, particularly from the area around Joren Falls. In this region, Jorōgumo is firmly associated with waterfalls and deep pools, those places where water churns and where the depths are unknown and potentially dangerous. The Izu tales emphasize her role as a predator, a being who uses beauty to lure men to their deaths. The moral of these stories is clear: be wary of beauty encountered in isolated places, and remember that nature is not always benign, no matter how beautiful it appears. But travel north to Sendai in Miyagi Prefecture, and you'll encounter a very different understanding of Jorōgumo. Here, particularly at the famous Kashikabuchi pool, the Spider Woman is not purely a villain but something more complex. Yes, she is dangerous. Yes, she has claimed victims. But she is also worshipped as a protective deity, a guardian spirit of the water who can prevent drownings and mishaps if properly respected. Local tradition holds that she will protect those who acknowledge her presence and make appropriate offerings, while only attacking those who disrespect her territory or who enter with impure intentions. This transformation from pure monster to protective spirit reflects an important aspect of Japanese spiritual tradition. In Shinto belief, kami, the spirits or gods that inhabit the natural world, are not purely good or purely evil. They are powerful forces that can be helpful or harmful, depending on how humans interact with them. A river kami might bring life, giving water for crops, or might flood and destroy villages. A mountain kami might provide game, animals, and timber, or might send avalanches and storms. The key is not to eliminate these powerful beings, which would be impossible anyway, but to establish proper relationships with them through ritual, respect, and offerings. In viewing Jorōgumo as a protective deity rather than purely a monster, the people of the Kashikabuchi region were doing what Japanese communities have done for thousands of years, negotiating with the powerful forces in their environment, seeking to transform potential enemies into potential allies. The spider woman at the pool would always be dangerous. That danger couldn't be erased, but it could perhaps be redirected, channeled toward protective purposes rather than predatory ones. The monuments and offerings left at Kashikabuchi speak to this ongoing relationship. Even today, visitors to the pool can find evidence of the Jorōgumo's continued presence in local spiritual life. People leave small offerings, say prayers, and show respect for the spirit that dwells there. Whether they truly believe in the literal existence of a spider woman or whether the ritual is more symbolic, the practice continues, connecting the present to a tradition that stretches back centuries. In other parts of Japan, Jorōgumo tales take on different characteristics. In some areas, she is associated not with waterfalls, but with old wells or with abandoned buildings. The specific location matters less than the general principle. She dwells in liminal spaces, places that are between civilization and wilderness, between the living world and the realm of the dead. Wells are particularly significant because they represent portals, openings that descend into the earth, into darkness and unknown depths. They provide necessary water, sustaining life, but they can also be places of death if someone falls in or if the water becomes contaminated. Some regional variants emphasize different aspects of Jorōgumo's seduction technique. In certain tales, she doesn't just appear as any beautiful woman, but specifically mimics someone the victim knows. She might take on the appearance of his wife, his sister, or a woman from his village he's admired from afar. This variation makes her even more insidious, because the victim isn't just attracted to a stranger. He believes he's encountering someone familiar, someone safe, someone he already has a relationship with or wants to have a relationship with. The betrayal runs deeper when the monster wears the face of someone you love or desire. Other stories emphasize her role not as a lone hunter, but as the leader of a spider court, a queen with many subjects and servants. In these versions, she is less a solitary predator and more a sovereign of her own dark kingdom, ruling over other spiders and perhaps even other yokai. This interpretation transforms her from individual monster to symbol of an entire hidden world that exists parallel to human society, complete with its own hierarchies and social structures. When a human encounters Jorōgumo in these tales, he's not just meeting one dangerous creature, but stumbling into an entire supernatural realm where human rules and human safety no longer apply. The sexual dimension of the Jorōgumo legend varies in explicitness, depending on the region and the era when the tale was told. Some versions are quite frank about the fact that she seduces men sexually, that she promises or delivers physical intimacy before revealing her true nature. Other versions are more circumspect, suggesting romantic attraction and potential marriage without delving into explicit details. This variation reflects changing social mores and the different audiences these stories were told to. A tale told around a campfire to adult men might be quite different from a story told to teach children about the dangers of wandering too far from home. Interestingly, some regional variants include successful resistance to Jorōgumo, not through violence or supernatural aid, but through moral virtue. In these tales, a man who is truly devoted to his wife, or a Buddhist monk who has achieved genuine spiritual purity, proves immune to Jorōgumo's seduction. His virtue creates a kind of shield that her illusions cannot penetrate. This interpretation transforms the legend from a simple monster story into a moral fable about the protective power of faithfulness and spiritual discipline. In a few rare variants, Jorōgumo is portrayed somewhat sympathetically, as a being who is lonely and who genuinely desires human companionship and love, even if her nature inevitably destroys any relationship she tries to build. These versions add a tragic dimension to the legend, suggesting that she is as much a victim of her own nature as the men she kills are victims of her predation. She didn't choose to become a monster. The 400 years of life transformed her, gave her powers she never asked for and needs she cannot ignore. Every attempt she makes to connect with humans ends in their death because she cannot escape what she is. This sympathetic interpretation never quite erases her danger or her culpability, but it adds layers of complexity that make her a more interesting character. The lonely monster who wants love but can only bring death is a recurring archetype in world mythology, and when it's applied to Jorōgumo, it raises questions about responsibility, fate, and the possibility of redemption. Can a creature like Jorōgumo change her nature? Can she choose not to kill, even though her survival might depend on it? Or is she locked into a pattern established 400 years ago when the transformation first occurred, doomed to repeat the same hunt, the same seduction, the same killing across centuries? The worship practices associated with Jorōgumo, where they exist, are modest compared to those devoted to major Shinto kami or Buddhist deities. There are no grand shrines dedicated to her, no priesthoods devoted to her service. Instead, the veneration is local and intimate, carried out by communities who live in close proximity to her supposed dwelling places. A small shrine near a waterfall, offerings of rice or sake left on particular days, prayers murmured by travelers asking for safe passage. These are the forms Jorōgumo worship takes. This modest scale of worship makes sense when we consider what Jorōgumo represents. She is not a creator deity or a cosmic force. She is a spirit of place, powerful within her domain but limited in scope. The people who worship or placate her are not seeking universal blessings, but rather specific protection from a specific danger in a specific location. It's a transaction, a recognition of power, and a request that that power not be turned against the petitioner. I acknowledge you, I respect you, I leave you this offering. In return, please let me pass safely. Some scholars have suggested that Jorōgumo and similar yokai served important social functions beyond simple entertainment. The warnings embedded in these tales helped reinforce social norms and behavior patterns. Young men were cautioned against wandering alone in dangerous places, against letting their desires override their caution, against trusting too quickly based on appearances. The tale of Jorōgumo served as a kind of survival guide, dressed in the trappings of supernatural horror. It taught pattern recognition, it encouraged healthy suspicion, and it reminded people that not everyone they met could be trusted. For women in traditional Japanese society, the Jorōgumo legend carried its own set of messages, though these were often more ambiguous and complicated. On one hand, Jorōgumo could be seen as a warning about female sexuality that wasn't properly controlled or channeled into socially acceptable forms like marriage. The horse spider designation made this interpretation explicit. But on the other hand, Jorōgumo also represented female power and agency, a woman who was nobody's victim, who controlled her own existence, and who was powerful enough to destroy men rather than being destroyed by them. In a society where women often had limited power, the figure of the Jorōgumo might have held a certain forbidden appeal, a fantasy of strength and autonomy. As we move forward in our exploration, It's important to keep these regional variations in mind. When we talk about the Jorōgumo legend, we're actually talking about a family of related stories, connected by common themes and elements, but expressing themselves differently depending on where and when they're told. This flexibility, this ability to adapt to different contexts while maintaining core identity, is part of what has allowed the legend to survive and remain relevant across centuries. The Jorōgumo legend, like many elements of Japanese folklore, has a rich documentary history that allows us to trace how the story has evolved and been transmitted across generations. While the oral tradition certainly predates written records, the earliest documented references to Jorōgumo and similar spider women yokai appear in medieval Japanese texts, providing us with a fascinating window into how these beings were understood by people living centuries ago. The Konjaku Monogatari, which we briefly mentioned earlier, is one of the most important sources for early Jorōgumo-type stories. This massive collection, compiled sometime in the late Heian period during the early 12th century, contains over 1,000 tales drawn from Japanese, Chinese, and Indian sources. The collection is divided into sections based on subject matter, with many tales focused on Buddhist teachings, historical events, and supernatural encounters. Several stories within the Konjaku Monogatari feature spiders that transform into beautiful women to deceive and prey upon men. One tale from this collection describes a monk who encounters a beautiful woman while traveling. She invites him to rest at her home, and despite some initial hesitation, he accepts. As night falls, he becomes uneasy and begins reciting Buddhist sutras. The sound of the holy words seems to disturb his hostess, and gradually her true nature is revealed. She is not a woman at all, but a massive spider. The monk's prayers protect him from her attack, and he manages to escape with his life, though the experience leaves him shaken and reinforced in his Buddhist practice. What's particularly interesting about these early accounts is that they don't yet use the specific term Jorōgumo. The spider women in these tales are simply described as large spiders or spider yokai with shape-shifting abilities. The name Jorōgumo, with its specific connotations and the organized legend we recognize today, seems to have developed later, likely during the Edo period, when there was an explosion of interest in cataloging and categorizing yokai. The Edo period, spanning from 1603 to 1868, was a time of relative peace and prosperity in Japan under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. With the country unified and stable, there was less need for constant warfare, and culture flourished. Literacy rates increased, publishing became more common, and there was a huge appetite for entertainment literature, including stories about yokai and the supernatural. It was during this period that many of the yokai we recognize today were given consistent names, descriptions, and characteristics. Several important texts from the Edo period document Jorōgumo specifically. The Tai-hei Hyaku Monogatari, published in the early 18th century, includes tales of Jorōgumo that emphasize her connection to waterfalls and her methods of seduction and entrapment. The stories in this collection are presented as cautionary tales, warning readers about specific dangers they might encounter and teaching them how to recognize and avoid supernatural threats. The Tano Higasa, another Edo period text, also features Jorōgumo prominently. This work presents the tale of the woodcutter who drops his axe in the waterfall and encounters the beautiful woman who retrieves it for him, only to later fall victim to her when he breaks his promise of secrecy. The Tano Higasa version emphasizes the importance of keeping promises. particularly promises made to supernatural beings, and the fatal consequences that can follow when such oaths are broken. But perhaps the most influential documentation of Jorōgumo comes not from prose narratives, but from illustrated encyclopedias of yokai. The artist Toriyama Seiken created a series of books in the late 18th century that attempted to catalog and illustrate the various supernatural creatures of Japanese folklore. These books, collectively known as the Gasu Hayaki Yajo series or the Illustrated Night Parade of 100 Demons, have had an enormous influence on how yokai are visualized and understood, both in historical Japan and in modern popular culture. Seiken's illustration of Jorōgumo shows her in her hybrid form, with the upper body of a beautiful woman and the lower body of a spider. She is surrounded by smaller spiders, suggesting her command over lesser creatures of her kind, and she holds a biwa, the traditional Japanese lute, emphasizing her role as a musical seductress. The image is beautifully rendered, done in the style of traditional Japanese woodblock printing, with elegant lines and careful attention to detail. It manages to be both attractive and unsettling, which perfectly captures Jorōgumo's dual nature. Seiken's work was immensely popular and influential. His illustrations became the standard visual reference for many yokai, and subsequent artists and writers drew from his depictions when creating their own works. In the case of Jorōgumo, Seiken's image of the beautiful woman, spider hybrid became the canonical representation, the version that most people picture when they hear her name. The accompanying text in Seiken's books provides additional context and information about each yokai. For Jorōgumo, he notes her association with waterfalls, her 400-year transformation, and her predatory nature. He also includes references to older texts and tales, connecting his work to the broader tradition of Japanese folklore. In this way, Seiken's encyclopedias functioned not just as entertainment, but as scholarly works that attempted to preserve and systematize folk knowledge. During the Meiji period, from 1868 to 1912, Japan underwent rapid modernization and westernization. The government promoted scientific education and rational thinking, and there was a general movement away from superstitious beliefs and practices. Folk tales and yokai legends were increasingly viewed as relics of a backwards past that modern Japan needed to move beyond. However, this didn't mean the tales disappeared. Instead, they shifted context, appearing more commonly in children's literature and in artistic works rather than being treated as accounts of genuine supernatural encounters. Folklorists during the Meiji period and beyond, including the famous Yanagita Kunio, who is often called the father of Japanese folklore studies, worked to collect and preserve these tales before they were lost entirely. Yanagita and others traveled throughout Japan, interviewing elderly people in rural areas who remembered the old stories and recording variations of legends like that of Jorōgumo. Their work was driven partly by nostalgia for a vanishing traditional culture, and partly by a genuine scholarly interest in understanding Japanese folk beliefs and how they reflected the values and concerns of pre-modern communities. These folklorists discovered that Jorōgumo tales remained common in oral tradition, even as belief in the literal truth of such stories declined. The tales had transformed from warnings about genuine supernatural dangers to moral fables and entertaining stories, but they maintained their power to captivate audiences. The image of the beautiful woman revealed as a monster, the tragedy of the man who falls in love with something that will destroy him. These narrative elements remained compelling even to people who didn't believe that spider women actually lurked in waterfalls. In the 20th century, Jorōgumo appeared in various forms of Japanese media. She showed up in novels, in manga, in films, and eventually in anime and video games. Each adaptation added new elements or emphasized different aspects of the legend while maintaining the core concept. Sometimes she was portrayed as purely villainous, sometimes as tragic, occasionally even as heroic or comedic depending on the needs of the story. This flexibility has helped keep the legend alive and relevant even as Japanese society has continued to modernize and urbanize. Academic studies of Jorōgumo have examined her from various perspectives. Folklorists analyze the tale as an example of supernatural warning narratives and examine how it reflects social anxieties about female sexuality, danger, and desire. Literary scholars study the various texts in which she appears, tracing how the legend evolved and how different authors used the Jorōgumo figure for different narrative purposes. Gender studies scholars have examined what the legend says about fear of female power and autonomy, and how the spider woman functions as both a monster and a symbol of feminine strength. The written record of Jorōgumo stretches across nearly 1,000 years, from early medieval references to contemporary retellings. Throughout this long history, certain core elements have remained consistent: the spider that transforms into a woman, the seduction and entrapment of male victims, the connection to water or to liminal spaces, the danger hidden beneath beauty. But the specific details, the moral lessons, and the cultural meanings attached to the legend have shifted with changing times and changing Japanese society. What these documents reveal, beyond the specific details of the Jorōgumo legend, is the enduring human need for stories that help us make sense of danger, desire, and the unknown. Every generation has told versions of this tale that spoke to their particular concerns and contexts. And every generation has found something compelling in the image of beauty as a mask for danger, in the reminder that not everything is as it seems, and in the tragedy of those who cannot see the truth until it's far too late. To fully understand the Jorōgumo legend, we must examine the real creature that inspired it, the Joro spider, scientifically known as Nephila clavata or sometimes Trichonephila clavata. This spider is not itself supernatural, but it possesses characteristics remarkable enough to fuel centuries of supernatural tales. By understanding the actual spider, we can better appreciate how observation of the natural world informed and shaped the folklore. The Joro spider is a member of the golden orb weaver family, a group of spiders found across tropical and subtropical regions worldwide. The Joro spider specifically is native to Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and parts of China. Female Joro spiders, which are significantly larger than males, can have a body length of about 2 to 3 centimeters, not including their legs. When leg span is included, they can reach about 8 to 10 centimeters across. While this is certainly large for a spider, especially by the standards of species commonly found around human habitation, it's nowhere near the massive, cow-sized creature of legend. However, to someone encountering one unexpectedly, particularly if they're already nervous about spiders, a Joro spider can seem impressively, even alarmingly large. The coloring of the Joro spider is striking and beautiful. The female's body is decorated with bright yellow and blue bands, with black bands separating the colors. Some individuals also show brilliant green or greenish blue coloration. The legs are black with yellow banding. This coloration serves multiple purposes in nature. It may help with thermoregulation, controlling body temperature in different environments. It also serves as warning coloration, signaling to potential predators, that this creature might be dangerous or unpleasant to eat. And it may play a role in sexual selection, with the most brilliantly colored females being more successful at attracting mates. Joro spiders build large, impressive orb webs, the classic circular spider web pattern that most people picture when they think of spider webs. These webs can span more than a meter in diameter when fully extended. The silk that Joro spiders produce has a distinctive golden color when it catches the light, which is why they're called golden orb weavers. This golden silk is remarkably strong, stronger than many other spider silks relative to its thickness. The webs are strong enough to occasionally catch small birds or bats, though the spider's primary diet consists of insects. The construction of these webs is a marvel of engineering. The spider begins by releasing a strand of silk that catches the breeze and attaches to a distant anchor point. This first strand becomes the bridge from which the rest of the web is constructed. The spider then creates a frame using non-sticky structural silk, and within that frame, it builds the spiral of sticky capture silk that will trap prey. The web's design allows it to absorb tremendous energy when something flies into it, preventing the web from simply breaking and allowing the prey to remain trapped. When prey is caught in the web, the spider responds quickly. She can sense vibrations in the web, allowing her to distinguish between prey struggling in the silk, debris blown by wind, and a potential mate carefully approaching along the signal threads. If it's prey, she rushes to it and delivers a venomous bite, then wraps it in silk, either to consume immediately or to save for later. Watching a Joro spider wrap its prey is a fascinating and somewhat unsettling sight. The spider rotates its prey rapidly, using its legs to pull silk from its spinnerets and wrap the victim in layer after layer of silk until it's completely encased. The venom of the Joro spider is not dangerous to humans. While a bite might be painful and might cause localized swelling or itching in some individuals, it poses no serious health threat to people. The venom is designed to subdue and begin digesting insects and other small prey, not to harm large mammals. However, to the insects and other small creatures that form the spider's diet, the venom is highly effective, quickly paralyzing them and beginning the process of breaking down their tissues so the spider can consume them. The sexual dimorphism in Joro spiders is quite pronounced. Females are several times larger than males, a pattern common in many spider species. The male's small size actually serves an important function. It allows him to approach the female to mate without being immediately identified as potential prey. Even so, mating is a dangerous activity for male Joro spiders. The female might attack and eat the male before, during, or after mating, depending on various factors including her hunger level and whether she's already mated with other males. This sexual cannibalism, where the female eats the male, occurs in many spider species and has likely contributed to folklore about predatory female spiders. Joro spiders are seasonal, with adults most commonly seen in late summer and fall. During this time, mated females produce egg sacs, carefully constructed packets of silk containing hundreds of eggs. The female typically creates the egg sac and attaches it securely to vegetation or to some protected location. She may guard the egg sac for a time, but she doesn't live long enough to see her offspring emerge. As winter approaches, the adult spiders die, but the eggs survive, protected in their silk cocoon, waiting for spring warmth to trigger hatching. The life cycle of the Joro spider, from tiny hatchling to mature adult, spans about a year. The spiders molt multiple times as they grow, shedding their exoskeletons and emerging larger each time. By late summer, They reach full adult size and sexual maturity. The females stake out territories and build their impressive webs. The much smaller males wander in search of females to mate with. And the cycle repeats, generation after generation, as it has for millions of years. In recent years, the Joro spider has gained attention for its spread into new territories. The species was accidentally introduced to the southeastern United States, probably arriving on shipping containers from East Asia. The first confirmed sighting in the U.S. was in Georgia in 2014, and since then the spiders have spread across several states. American officials and scientists are monitoring the situation, trying to understand what impact, if any, these introduced spiders might have on native ecosystems. The introduction of Joro spiders to new territories has allowed Western audiences to encounter these striking spiders firsthand. Photos and videos of Joro spiders in their webs have circulated widely on social media, often accompanied by alarm or concern. Some of this reaction seems excessive, given that the spiders pose no real danger to humans, but it reflects the deep-seated fear many people have toward spiders, especially large and unfamiliar ones. From a broader perspective, the Joro spider's characteristics make it easy to see how the Jorōgumo legend developed. Here is a spider that is large and strikingly colored, that builds enormous webs of golden silk strong enough to catch creatures much larger than typical insects, that sometimes exhibits aggressive behavior toward other creatures entering its web, and that features sexual cannibalism where females sometimes consume males. For people living hundreds of years ago, encountering these spiders regularly, particularly in areas where the spiders were especially common, it's not surprising that supernatural tales would develop. The 400-year transformation described in the folklore also makes a certain metaphorical sense when we consider spider biology. Spiders are ancient creatures that seem alien and other to humans. They have too many legs, too many eyes, they move in unexpected ways, and their predatory behavior. The patient waiting in a web, followed by sudden strikes, and the wrapping of prey, seems both calculated and ruthless. A spider that lives for 400 years, accumulating experience and power, makes for a perfect supernatural threat, familiar enough to be recognizable as a spider, but elevated to a level of power and intelligence that transcends the natural order. The association with water, particularly with waterfalls and pools, might also connect to the real spider's habitat preferences. Joro spiders often build their webs near water sources where insect populations are high. The combination of a large spider in a golden web beside a misty waterfall would create a striking and somewhat eerie sight, especially in the half-light of dawn or dusk, when imagination might be more prone to seeing patterns and threats. In examining the real Joro spider, we're not diminishing the Jorōgumo legend, but rather understanding its roots. The legend takes the remarkable characteristics of a real creature and amplifies them, adds intelligence and intent, crosses the boundary from animal to yokai. The result is something far more frightening than the actual spider could ever be, but also something that carries within it the truth of the spider's beauty, its skill, and its predatory nature. The Jorōgumo is what the Joro spider becomes in human imagination, enlarged and transformed by fear, fascination, and the storyteller's art. The Jorōgumo legend operates on multiple levels of meaning, functioning simultaneously as entertainment, as moral instruction, as psychological insight, and as social commentary. To fully appreciate the tale, we need to examine what the spider woman symbolizes and what deeper truths the legend might be trying to communicate beyond the surface narrative of a monster who kills travelers. At the most basic level, Jorōgumo represents the danger of deceptive appearances. The legend's core message is straightforward. Things are not always what they seem, and beauty can mask deadly intent. This is a lesson that applies far beyond encounters with supernatural beings. In any human society, the ability to recognize deception, to see past attractive surfaces to underlying reality, is a crucial survival skill. People who seem kind might be manipulative. Situations that appear safe might be dangerous. The Jorōgumo legend teaches pattern recognition and healthy suspicion, encouraging listeners to question their first impressions and to remain aware of danger, even in pleasant circumstances. The sexual dimension of the Jorōgumo legend is impossible to ignore and has been the subject of much scholarly analysis. On one level, the tales can be read as warnings about the dangers of lust and uncontrolled sexual desire. The victims in Jorōgumo stories are almost always men who are lured by a beautiful woman, and their downfall often comes because they allow desire to override caution and common sense. In traditional Japanese society, which placed high value on self-control and proper behavior, these tales served as cautionary examples of what could happen when one gave in to passions. But the sexual symbolism runs deeper than simple moral lessons about lust. The Jorōgumo represents anxieties about female sexuality that isn't controlled by marriage, family, or social convention. She is a woman who exists outside the normal structures of society, who chooses her own partners, and who destroys rather than submits. The whore spider designation makes this interpretation explicit. She is everything that traditional patriarchal society feared: a woman who was sexual but not subordinate, who had power rather than vulnerability, who consumed rather than being consumed. From a feminist perspective, however, Jorōgumo can also be read as a symbol of female power and agency, even if that power is expressed in destructive ways. She is nobody's victim. She doesn't need protection or rescue. She is not defined by her relationship to men except as their predator. In a society where women often had limited power, and where female identity was frequently defined entirely through relationships to fathers, husbands, and sons, the figure of the independent, powerful Jorōgumo might have represented both a fear and a forbidden fantasy of autonomy and strength. The transformation aspect of the Jorōgumo legend carries its own symbolic weight. Shape-shifting in folklore often represents the idea that identity is not fixed, that beings can contain multiple natures simultaneously, and that the boundary between categories is more permeable than it might seem. Jorōgumo is both woman and spider, both beautiful and monstrous. She exists in the liminal space between categories, refusing to be neatly classified. This liminality makes her dangerous because humans are creatures who like clear categories and boundaries. We want to know what something is so we can respond appropriately. The Jorōgumo denies us that certainty. The spider itself, separate from its association with femininity, carries particular symbolic meanings in many cultures. Spiders are weavers, creators of intricate patterns and traps. They are patient predators who wait for prey to come to them rather than actively hunting. They are associated with fate and destiny because they spin webs much as the fates of Greek mythology spin the thread of human life. In the Jorōgumo legend, these associations are all present. She weaves traps. She is patient across centuries. And those who encounter her find their fate sealed, their lives cut short by a creature who has been waiting, always waiting, for them to walk into her web. The connection to water and waterfalls also deserves symbolic examination. Water in Japanese culture and in many cultures worldwide represents both life and death, purity and danger. It is necessary for survival, but can also drown or sweep away. Waterfalls specifically are places of power, where water falls from one level to another, where mist creates obscuring fog, where the constant roar drowns out other sounds. They are threshold spaces, neither entirely of the mountain above nor of the valley below. As such, they are perfect habitats for liminal beings like yokai who exist between the human world and the spirit world. The Jorōgumo's use of music in the legend adds another layer of symbolic meaning. Music is often associated with enchantment and seduction in mythology worldwide. From the sirens of Greek legend to the Pied Piper of European folklore, music bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to emotions. It can soothe, excite, entrance, or disturb. The fact that Jorōgumo plays the biwa, an instrument associated with courtly culture and refined artistic skill, emphasizes the sophistication of her deception. She is not a crude monster, but a subtle and cultured predator who understands beauty and knows how to use it as a weapon. The 400-year lifespan required for the transformation from ordinary spider to Jorōgumo is symbolically significant as well. 400 years represents a vast accumulation of experience, a duration so long that it transcends normal understanding. A being that has lived for 4 centuries has seen empires rise and fall, has watched countless generations of humans live and die, has learned more about the world than any human could ever know. This accumulated knowledge and experience transforms into supernatural power. The Jorōgumo is dangerous not just because she is a monster, but because she is wise in the ways of humans, having observed them for longer than any individual human could possibly live. From a psychological perspective, Jorōgumo can be understood as representing the shadow, that aspect of the psyche described by Carl Jung that contains all the qualities we deny in ourselves. She embodies desires that society deems unacceptable: aggressive sexuality, predatory behavior, the will to power, the hunger that can never be satisfied. By externalizing these qualities as a monster, the legend allows people to confront and contemplate these aspects of human nature, while maintaining a safe psychological distance. We can explore these dangerous territories through the story without having to acknowledge that the capacity for deception, seduction, and predation exists within ourselves. The Jorōgumo legend also functions as a story about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, between the safe, known world and the dangerous, wild places beyond its boundaries. She dwells at waterfalls, in forests, in remote places away from villages and cities. She represents the danger that awaits those who venture too far from safety, who enter wild spaces unprepared or disrespectful. In traditional Japanese society, where most people lived in small communities surrounded by mountains and forests, the wilderness was a constant presence, beautiful but dangerous, necessary for resources like timber and game, but also home to bears, wild boars, and other threats. The Jorōgumo personifies this duality, this beauty, danger of the wild. At its deepest level, the Jorōgumo legend might be understood as a meditation on the nature of desire and the tragedy of connection that destroys rather than sustains. The men who fall victim to Jorōgumo are often portrayed as seeking connection, companionship, love. What they find is something that wears the mask of what they desire, but which will ultimately destroy them. This speaks to a fundamental human fear, that the thing we most want might be the thing that destroys us, that our desires might lead us into traps of our own making, that we might not be able to distinguish between love and danger until it's far too late. the legend doesn't offer easy answers to these concerns. Jorōgumo is not defeated in most versions of the tale. She continues to exist, continues to hunt, continues to claim victims. She is a permanent feature of the landscape, a danger that must be navigated rather than eliminated. This reflects a worldview that sees danger and death not as problems that can be solved, but as fundamental aspects of existence that must be understood and respected. The world contains beauty and terror, often inextricably linked. The wise person learns to recognize both and to proceed with awareness and caution. The visual and literary representations of Jorōgumo have evolved significantly over the centuries, with each era and medium adding new dimensions to how this spider woman is depicted and understood. From ancient woodblock prints to modern anime, Jorōgumo has been imagined and reimagined countless times, each depiction reflecting the artistic sensibilities and cultural concerns of its time. As we've discussed, Toriyama Seiken's 18th century illustration remains perhaps the most influential visual depiction of Jorōgumo. His image of the hybrid spider woman playing the biwa established visual conventions that many subsequent artists would follow. The combination of beautiful woman and spider, the presence of smaller spider servants, the musical instrument, all of these elements appear again and again in later artistic works. Seiken's style, rooted in the tradition of Japanese woodblock printing with its clean lines and flat planes of color, gave Jorōgumo an elegant, almost serene appearance despite her monstrous nature. Other Edo period artists also depicted Jorōgumo and similar spider yokai. These illustrations appeared in books of ghost stories and yokai encyclopedias, serving both as entertainment and as visual references for the creatures described in the accompanying text. The artistic conventions of the time meant that these images often had a decorative quality, with careful attention paid to the patterns on clothing, the rendering of hair and facial features, and the overall composition of the image. Even when depicting something supernatural and frightening, the artists maintained the aesthetic standards of their tradition. In modern times, Jorōgumo has appeared in countless manga and anime, each adaptation making choices about how to visualize her. Some maintain the traditional half-woman, half-spider form, while others show her as primarily human with only subtle spider characteristics visible. The artistic style can range from traditionally Japanese to highly stylized contemporary anime aesthetics. In some works, she is portrayed as antagonistic, a monster to be fought and defeated. In others, she is more sympathetic, perhaps a misunderstood being or even a protagonist trying to navigate relationships with humans despite her dangerous nature. Japanese cinema has also explored the Jorōgumo legend. Films have brought her to life through practical effects, animatronics, CGI, and combinations of techniques. The challenge for filmmakers is to make her seem genuinely threatening while maintaining the allure that allows her to trap victims. This balance between beautiful and horrifying is central to the character, and successful film depictions manage to create a sense of unease even when showing her in attractive human form, perhaps through subtle wrongness in her movements or through the reactions of other characters who sense something amiss. Literature beyond traditional folktales has embraced Jorōgumo as well. Japanese authors writing in various genres have incorporated her into their work, sometimes remaining faithful to traditional depictions and sometimes radically reimagining the character. Horror writers have explored the visceral terror of her predation. Romance writers have created tragic stories of impossible love between human men and the spider woman. Fantasy writers have built entire worlds where Jorōgumo exists alongside other yokai, creating complex supernatural societies. One interesting trend in modern literary and media depictions is the humanization or sympathetic portrayal of Jorōgumo. Rather than being a simple monster, she is given interiority, motivations, and sometimes redemptive qualities. We might learn her backstory, discover the loneliness of her existence, or see her struggle with her predatory nature. These portrayals reflect contemporary sensibilities that are more interested in moral complexity and in exploring different perspectives than in simple good versus evil narratives. The global spread of Japanese popular culture through anime, manga, and video games has introduced Jorōgumo to audiences worldwide. Western creators have also begun incorporating Jorōgumo into their works, though sometimes with changes that reflect different cultural contexts and concerns. In some cases, Jorōgumo appears in works that are set in Japan and that attempt to remain somewhat faithful to Japanese folklore. In others, she is transported to different settings or combined with other mythological traditions in creative ways. Video games have proven to be a particularly rich medium for Jorōgumo appearances. Games set in mythological Japan often include her as an enemy or boss character, taking advantage of the interactive nature of the medium to let players directly confront her. The Spider Woman becomes a puzzle to solve, a pattern to learn, a challenge to overcome. Some games allow players to befriend or even become a Jorōgumo, exploring her abilities and perspective from the inside. The flexibility of the gaming medium allows for interpretations and interactions with the legend that would be difficult or impossible in more linear media. Artistic depictions of Jorōgumo are not limited to explicitly narrative media. She has inspired paintings, sculptures, digital art, and various forms of craft work. Artists drawn to Japanese mythology or to spider imagery find in Jorōgumo a subject that is both beautiful and unsettling, allowing them to explore themes of seduction, danger, and transformation. Some artists emphasize the horror aspects, creating images that are visceral and frightening. Others focus on the elegance and beauty, creating works that are seductive and only subtly threatening. Contemporary Japanese tattoo art sometimes features Jorōgumo as a subject. Traditional Japanese tattooing, or arizumi, has long incorporated yokai and mythological subjects into its repertoire. A Jorōgumo tattoo might be chosen for its visual appeal, for its connection to Japanese cultural heritage, or for the symbolic meanings associated with the character. The person wearing such a tattoo might identify with the power and independence of the Spider Woman, or they might simply appreciate the aesthetic and narrative richness of the image. The representation of Jorōgumo in art and literature serves multiple functions beyond simple entertainment. These depictions keep the legend alive and relevant, introducing it to new generations and new audiences. They provide commentary on the original legend, sometimes reinforcing traditional interpretations and sometimes subverting or complicating them. They allow artists and writers to explore themes of desire, danger, transformation, and power through the lens of this particular character, and they contribute to an ongoing conversation about what Jorōgumo means and why the legend continues to resonate centuries after it first appeared. As long as there are artists and storytellers, Jorōgumo will likely continue to appear in new works, always recognizable but always changing, much like the shapeshifter herself. Each depiction adds another thread to the web of meaning that surrounds this figure, another interpretation that expands our understanding of what the Spider Woman represents and why we remain fascinated by her. The Jorōgumo is far from the only spider woman in world mythology. Across cultures and throughout history, various traditions have featured feminine figures associated with spiders, weaving, and often with danger or deception. Examining these other spider women helps us understand both what is unique about Jorōgumo and what universal human concerns and fascinations she represents. Perhaps the most famous spider woman in Western mythology is Arachne from Greek legend. Arachne was a mortal woman, a weaver of extraordinary skill, who became so proud of her abilities that she dared to challenge the goddess Athena to a weaving contest. Arachne's tapestry was perfect, perhaps even more beautiful than Athena's. But its subject matter was insulting to the gods, depicting their various scandals and infidelities. In anger, Athena destroyed Arachne's work and struck her. In despair, Arachne attempted to hang herself, but Athena transformed her into a spider, condemning her to weave forever. The tale of Arachne is quite different from that of Jorōgumo in several key respects. Arachne was human before becoming a spider, whereas Jorōgumo is a spider who becomes partially human. Arachne's transformation is a punishment, a curse that reduces her from human to animal, while Jorōgumo's transformation is an elevation, gaining supernatural powers and human form. And yet both stories associate spiders with weaving, with feminine skill, and with a kind of pride or dangerousness that makes them threatening to established order. In Native American traditions, particularly among the Navajo and other southwestern tribes, Spider Woman is a powerful and generally benevolent figure. She is often portrayed as a creator deity or culture hero who taught humans important skills and who helped shape the world. In Navajo tradition, Spider Woman taught the people the art of weaving, a skill that became central to their culture. She is wise, helpful, and protective, watching over the people from her home on Spider Rock in Canyon de Chelly. This benevolent spider woman stands in stark contrast to predatory figures like Jorōgumo. The difference likely reflects different cultural attitudes towards spiders and different cultural needs. In the southwestern desert, where life is harsh and survival depends on skills like weaving that provide clothing and tradable goods, a spider deity who teaches and protects makes cultural sense. In mountainous, forested Japan, where travelers faced real dangers in remote places and where social order was carefully maintained, a spider who represents the danger of desire and wilderness serves different functions. African folklore includes various spider figures, though these are more commonly male than female. Anansi, the spider trickster of West African and Caribbean traditions, is clever, scheming, and often both helpful and harmful depending on the story. Anansi's stories served important cultural functions in West African societies and were carried to the Americas through the slave trade, where they continue to be told and to evolve. While not a female figure, Anansi shares with Jorōgumo the quality of existing in an ambiguous moral space, sometimes helping humans and sometimes causing them trouble. In some South American indigenous traditions, there are spider women or spider spirits associated with both creation and danger. These figures sometimes teach important skills, but can also be jealous or vengeful if disrespected. The specific details vary widely among different tribes and regions, but the association of spiders with feminine power, with creation through weaving, and with potential danger appears repeatedly. European folklore has various creatures that combine feminine beauty with predatory nature, though not always specifically in spider form. The succubus of medieval demonology, for instance, is a female demon who seduces men and drains their life force, not unlike what Jorōgumo does. The sirens of Greek mythology lure sailors to their deaths with beautiful singing, much as Jorōgumo uses her biwa music. The similarities suggest common concerns across cultures about the dangers of desire, about beauty as a potential trap, and about feminine sexuality that isn't safely contained within social structures like marriage. What is somewhat unique about Jorōgumo among these various spider women and seductress figures is the specificity of her transformation, the detailed accounts of her methods, and her strong association with particular places in the landscape. She isn't a universal archetype, but a localized spirit known to haunt specific waterfalls and pools. This rootedness in place gives her legends a concreteness that some more general mythological figures lack. When someone tells a Jorōgumo story, they can often point to a real location and say, "This is where it happened," lending the tale an air of documentary reality rather than pure fantasy. The comparison with other spider women also highlights the cultural flexibility of the spider as a symbol. Depending on context, spiders can represent patience, skill, creativity, fate, predation, or danger. The weaving of webs can symbolize the creation of art, the spinning of fate, or the construction of traps. Female spiders, which are often larger and more dangerous than males, can represent powerful femininity, maternal protection, or predatory sexuality. The Jorōgumo legend takes these various potential meanings and combines them in a specific way that reflected the concerns and values of the Japanese culture that created and maintained the legend. Interestingly, the modern global circulation of Japanese popular culture has introduced Jorōgumo to audiences who have their own Spider Woman traditions. This has led to creative hybridization in some cases, where elements of different traditions are combined. A Western creator might create a character who draws on both Jorōgumo and Arachne, or who exists in a world where multiple Spider Woman traditions are acknowledged to coexist. This cross-pollination of mythological traditions is increasingly common in our globalized world and likely will lead to new versions and interpretations of these ancient figures. The persistence of spider women across so many cultures suggests that they tap into something fundamental in human psychology. Spiders themselves evoke complex reactions in humans. Many people fear them despite the fact that most spiders are harmless to humans. This fear, called arachnophobia, is one of the most common specific phobias. The combination of too many legs, unexpected movement, and sometimes venomous bites creates a creature that triggers deep anxiety in many people. When this already unsettling creature is combined with human female form, particularly with beauty and sexuality, the result is a figure that embodies multiple anxieties simultaneously. Fear of spiders, anxiety about female sexuality, concerns about deception and appearances, dread of predation and death, all of these come together in the Spider Woman figure. She represents a convergence of threats, making her a powerful symbol for storytellers and a memorable figure for audiences. The universality of some elements of Spider Woman legends, combined with the specific cultural variations, demonstrates how mythology works. Certain themes and concerns are common across human societies: the danger of desire, the complexity of gender roles, the fear of death, the anxiety about being deceived. But each culture expresses these universal concerns through its own specific symbols, stories, and contexts. Jorōgumo is both a universal figure and a distinctly Japanese one, recognizable as part of a broader tradition of spider women while remaining unique in her specific characteristics and cultural meanings. As our journey through the legend of Jorōgumo draws to a close, we find ourselves with a deeper understanding of this fascinating and frightening figure. We've traced her name from its blunt origins as Horse Spider to the more poetic Binding Bride. We've explored her various forms, from beautiful woman to massive spider to hybrid creature that embodies both natures simultaneously. We've examined her powers, her hunting methods, and the tales told about her across the centuries. We've met the real spider that inspired the legend and explored what Jorōgumo symbolizes in Japanese culture and beyond. What emerges from this exploration is a picture of a legend that has remained vital and relevant across centuries because it speaks to fundamental human concerns. The Jorōgumo legend teaches us that beauty can mask danger, that desire can lead us into traps, that not everything is as it seems, and that we must maintain awareness and caution, even in seemingly safe or pleasant circumstances. These are lessons that remain just as relevant today as they were when the first Jorōgumo tales were told around fires in medieval Japan. The legend also reminds us of the power of storytelling to preserve cultural knowledge and values. The tales of Jorōgumo served multiple functions in the societies that told them. They provided entertainment, certainly, but they also taught survival skills, reinforced social norms, explored complex emotions and situations, and helped people make sense of a world that often seemed dangerous and unpredictable. They allowed communities to articulate and confront fears, to contemplate desires and their consequences, and to transmit wisdom from one generation to the next. In examining Jorōgumo, we've also explored broader questions about the relationship between humans and nature, about gender roles and sexuality, about transformation and identity, and about the boundary between the civilized world and the wilderness. We've seen how a legend can function simultaneously as a monster story, a cautionary tale, a moral lesson, a psychological insight, and a work of art. The richness of the Jorōgumo legend lies partly in this multiplicity of meanings, the way it operates on multiple levels at once. For modern audiences, Jorōgumo continues to fascinate because the concerns she embodies remain relevant. We still grapple with questions about how to distinguish genuine connection from manipulation. We still confront situations where beauty or pleasure might mask danger. We still live in a world where things are not always what they seem, where beneath attractive surfaces might lurk harmful intent. The Spider Woman reminds us to look beyond first impressions, to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, and to remember that caution and awareness are not the same as paranoia or cynicism. The enduring appeal of Jorōgumo and similar legends also speaks to our fascination with liminality, with beings and experiences that exist between categories. In a world that often demands clear classifications and firm boundaries, figures like Jorōgumo, who resist easy categorization, remain compelling. She is both woman and spider, both beautiful and monstrous, both alluring and terrifying. She exists in threshold spaces, at waterfalls and wells, in forests and at the edges of villages. She reminds us that reality is more complex than our categories suggest, that the world contains mystery and ambiguity, and that not everything can or should be neatly labeled and filed away. As you settle deeper into sleep tonight, with the image of the Jorōgumo dwelling in your imagination, consider what she means to you personally. Perhaps she represents a warning you need to hear, a reminder to be more cautious in your own life, more aware of situations and people that might not be what they seem. Perhaps she represents a kind of power you wish you possessed, the strength and independence to exist on your own terms regardless of what society expects. Or perhaps she is simply a fascinating character from a distant culture and time, a piece of storytelling artistry that you can appreciate without needing to extract particular lessons or meanings. The beauty of folklore is that it doesn't demand a single interpretation. The stories are flexible, adaptable, capable of speaking to different people in different ways, depending on what they need to hear. The Jorōgumo who warns one person about the dangers of lust might represent to another person the tragedy of a being who can never have genuine connection because of her nature. The same legend that teaches one listener about the importance of keeping promises might teach another about the power of music to enchant and transform. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you can rest easy knowing that while Jorōgumo might haunt the waterfalls and forests of Japan, she's unlikely to appear in your bedroom. The Spider Woman prefers wild places, liminal zones where the boundary between the human world and the spirit world grows thin. She isn't interested in the domestic, the mundane, the safely civilized. She belongs to the mist and the falling water, to the deep forest and the hidden pool. She belongs to the imagination, to the realm of stories where she can continue to fascinate and frighten, to warn and to wonder. The tale of Jorōgumo, the binding bride, the Spider Woman of the waterfalls, is a gift from the past to the present. It connects us to centuries of Japanese storytelling tradition, to the people who told and retold these tales, to the artists who illustrated them, to the travelers who carried warnings from village to village. It connects us to something timeless in the human experience, the need to understand danger, to contemplate desire, to explore the shadow aspects of ourselves and our world through the safe remove of story. And so, as the rain falls softly outside, as the night deepens around you, as your breath slows and your body relaxes into the comfort of your bed, let the story of Jorōgumo fade gently into the background of your consciousness. Let her image remain beautiful and terrible, a reminder of mysteries that persist, of stories that endure, of the rich tradition of Japanese folklore that has so much still to teach and to share. Thank you for joining me on this long journey into the legend of Jorōgumo. If you've enjoyed tonight's tale, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations of Japanese folklore, mythology, and legend. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more yokai to meet, so many more mysteries waiting in the mist. Until next time, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, not everything beautiful is safe, but not everything safe is beautiful either. The world contains both wonder and danger, and sometimes, as Jorōgumo reminds us, they wear the same face. Good night.